Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another monthly wrap-up. And this monthly wrap-up is characterized by two things. One, I'm still working on giving myself a break because I took a couple days off this month for like holidays and stuff, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's such a bad reading month. But then when I counted up the books I read 11. So like, I gotta learn to chill. And then also, this month was more or less proved, like it has been proved before, that I'm obsessed with indie books because I was doing some prep work in preparation for Indiecember next month, or probably this month as you're watching this, and I wanted to get a little bit of the board covered, and I got a lot of the board covered to the extent that I actually had to like stop and slow down to make sure that I didn't like rob myself of content because I want to do Indiecember vlogs next month, but you can't really do Indiecember vlogs if you're not reading Indiecember books. So so yes, I continue to not give myself a break, and I continue to be obsessed with indie books. Not much is new. So let's jump right into what I've been reading. First up, I read The Loom of Sorrows by Matthew Cagle. This is a sci-fi taking place in the far future. Humanity was on a dying planet. They moved to this other planet called Joshua 20, which was arguably even worse. This man named Enon came back to see if Earth was livable again. It was, but for some reason he went back to Joshua 20 anyway, and no one really knows why. In the quote-unquote current day that our story takes place, it is all about this man who accidentally gets the memories and flashbacks of Enon in his head, and he has to figure out what made him go back before the memories slowly kill him. I loved this book. Reviewing it was a joy. I have recommended it to other booktubers, and in general, it's very intense. There are some trigger warnings for rape and sexual assault. However, it is a very brief scene and not that drawn out, but I was impressed by the world building and the technology, and it felt very much like meaty sci-fi, but without being too over the top. The style and the format with the flashbacks was really well done, with oftentimes flashbacks starting in the middle of a sentence, and it emphasized how much these flashbacks just take over the protagonist. I really appreciated that. I am going to be reviewing the sequel as well, and the author did explain to me, because I mentioned in the review that like it's only 200 pages and the sequel is 250, so why wasn't one book? And the author said that he tried it, but readers preferred two shorter books. So like, you know, an indie author's got to be savvy, so I'll give him that one. Next up, another review book, Dread by Leela Mina. I can't say much about this because it is the sequel in her Temperance trilogy. It is a non-Western polyamorous romance between this young, well, she's not really young, she's in her 30s, foreigner living in Japan, and the relationship she strikes up with this married couple. It was fantastic. I don't think I liked it as much as I did the first one, but Yuki continues to be the bisexual I want to be. The relationship matures a lot more in the emotional sense. There are some very strange left turns and some very big plot reveals, and also Leela has told me that something in the third book might break my heart, so I'm really nervous, but that is also on my review list. So here's hoping I can get through it. Up next, yet another review because I was just going crazy this month. Moon Sitting by M. Harding. I was struck by the idea of this and I loved it. This is a sci-fi novella all about this strange giant thing that people have just taken to calling the moon that crashed onto this planet, and now there are 3 moon sitters, aka 3 people that like are literally just sitting and staring at this thing to make sure it doesn't do anything, because when it crash landed, it kind of like sent a plague and destroyed half the planet. So our main character, Lucky, is drawn to it for a strange reason. She doesn't know why. And again, I can't tell you very much because there's this giant like plot twist reveal in like the first third of the book that changes the setup for all of it, and I loved it. It's a really quick novella. I believe the author said she is going to be writing something, if not a sequel, then something in the same universe moving forward, and I might low-key have to jump into that because, oh, I love the concept was so interesting and the reveal was awesome. Loved it. Up next was Kitty's Witch by Roxy Harper. This is one of the books that I got a request for when I was actually close to reviews, but I knew from the moment I read it, even while I was closed, like I had it bookmarked to accept later. This is a satire comedy type story all about a witch who sucks at being a witch. She's literally called the faulty West Coast witch, or is she East Coast? I don't know, I don't keep reading. So Serena is this faulty witch, and she's got this best friend who has a much better behaved familiar, and she's much farther ahead on her magic, and it's all about Serena essentially trying to prove herself and figure out why her familiar seems to hate her. It's this cat that she just calls Cat, and I love that. We just called Cat. Again, another reveal fairly early-ish on that changes the entirety of the book, and so like a lot of the plot is based on that, so I can't tell you more than what I've already told you about that. But there is that crazy grandma character that I love to see in like every kind of story. She deals weed and is into BDSM despite being like 800 years old, and also low-key might have been a serial killer at one point. Love Grams. And then as I said that in my review, a bunch of other people who have read the book were like, yes, Grams! So we are all on board for psychotic grandmas. Up next was Falling for a Wolf by Dawn Marie Clifton. This is a historical romance taking place shortly after the Civil War in, I believe, the Dakotas? No, the Carolinas, other half of the country. And it's all about a young healer who starts falling for this man. And this book I wanted to like, but I had a couple struggles with it. For example, the story is way more faith-based than the synopsis would lead you to believe. Like, the characters focus on God as like a giant part of her character arc, and there's entire discussions involving Bible verses. So like, I felt a little misled in that because the synopsis, like, nothing, it's not advertised as any kind of faith-based. And also there was this portion of the book, a subplot that has to do with the freedman's colony on Roanoke, and this was a colony of freed slaves that had basically been given the land from the government, the Union government, and then later on had it taken away and were basically sent back. And this was a subplot in that the characters talked about it a lot, but you never actually saw a black character in the story. So it's like, if you're going to include an entire subplot that is all about black people, why are you only focusing on white characters? And I don't think the author, Dawn Marie Clifton, meant to say anything about that, or I don't think it was like a conscious decision on her part, but it didn't sit well with me, so I think I ended up giving that like 2 stars. And every book I reviewed will have their links down in the description, like usual with my monthly wrap-ups, but that one, I just could not get into it as much as I'd been hoping for, and I really do want to get into more historical romances, because at one point in time, those were like my bread and butter. Up next was an out-of-nowhere book that I didn't think I would love, but for some reason, I got it from BookBub, and I saw it, and I was like, oh, okay, no, I have to. And that is The Vampire Knitting Club by Nancy Warren. This is a cozy mystery, and it does what it says on the tin. This young woman comes back from an archaeological dig that she'd been on with her parents to find that her grandma is dead, except not. Grandma's a vampire. And there is literally a vampire knitting club that goes on in this grandmother's knitting shop. And I was so intrigued by this concept. And there's some other reveals beyond that that was really intriguing. I loved it. I love how adorably, like, inept at times our protagonist is, whose name I'm forgetting. I read 11 books this month, guys. So I probably will continue with the series. I am seeing the possibility of a love triangle, and I'm not the biggest fan, but the other aspects of these, like, big, strong creatures of the night literally sitting around and knitting sweaters is enough to carry me through. I will definitely continue. Up next, I continued this, and I was like, hey, let's go out of nowhere and pick another random thing off BookBub to keep covering the board. So I picked The Crow Lands by T.M. Creedy. This is a ghost story. I'm not sure if it goes more towards horror or thriller. It's kind of in that gray area about this woman who is down on her luck with a gambling addiction, and there's some stuff that happens, and I don't want to go too much into it because the actual what happens is pretty intense. She ends up with a lot of money and some danger following her, so she goes to this old house to house it in Australia for a year. And she's not the only one in that house. And it was creepy beyond belief. The ambiance of this giant old house that used to be like an asylum for children that were abused, and the extent of the abuses. We got some trigger warnings for, let's see, rape, abuse, some other, your basic ghost story, horrible backstory. But the fact that it was this giant house sitting in the middle of nowhere, and like she's half an hour from the nearest town, and the isolation really crept in, like it was done so well. The ending felt a little bit too weird for the realistic lead up, but I appreciated how hard it went, and it was just a fantastic spooky read, and I'm really glad that I decided to just randomly read stuff off of BookBub this month because I found some absolute gems. Up next, I decided to go a little bit lighter, and the minute I saw this book on Twitter when the author was asking for reviewers, I'm like, I have to, it's so cute. And that is Full Moon by Cindy Cloutier. This is a lower mid-grade werewolf story, all about this, I believe he is 9 years old, a 9-year-old werewolf named Sam who gets fleas, and thanks to his sister, he has even worse problems. And the harvest fair is coming up soon, and it's the big hunt that all the wolves go to, and he's going to be so embarrassed if he doesn't solve this thing. And it is so cute. I loved it. It was like the least angsty werewolf story I've ever read, because if you've read any kind of werewolf stories, like they get pretty angsty and dramatic. This one was so lighthearted. Now it is lower mid-grade, so it's more for kids in like 2nd or 3rd grade than 4th or 5th grade, or, you know, kids with that reading level, depending on whatever age they are. But for what it is adorable. I loved it. I was cringing at parts, but I think that's just because I was an adult reading this and I could see how the possible solutions they were going through were not going to end well. But if you have any nieces or nephews or kids you babysit for that you're looking to buy indie books for moving forward, you gotta check this one out. So up next, I actually read 2 books at the exact same time. I would literally read like 50 pages of this one and 50 pages of that one. So let's start with the first one I started, and that is The Pact by Ashlyn Johnson. This was a book I was sent for review, all about a young woman named Evie who has been cursed from birth by this demon who gave her this power with the whole purpose of turning her into his tool to end the world. And the angels must then kind of form this team to defend her and, you know, keep the world from ending. Now, I love that premise. I love that kind of cursed one, you have been chosen to do a horrible thing type of premise. And I love found families, and this looked like it might be a found family. However, this book felt a little bit like a self-insert. Evie was a little too insta-loved by the entire group when I didn't really like her all that much, and I found more and more as I read kind of like illogical inconsistencies that didn't quite add up. So the idea of it was there. In general, I think I likened it in my review to that first big book you write on your own that is instrumental in creating your style, but you might not ever let see the light of day. And that's kind of what I can see here. Like, there are so many good separate elements that if Ashlyn Johnson took and kind of molded further could turn into a fantastic style. But this one wasn't really it. I think I ended up giving it like 2 stars. And then while I was reading that one, I had to read this one because I saw the premise, knew I needed to read it. I actually asked for this one to review from the author on the Indiecember Discord, because the minute I saw it, I was like, yes, please. And that is Unknown Horizons by Casey White. This is a space opera, and you know I love me some space operas. This is all about a woman named Sam who is kidnapped from Earth and basically held for, she doesn't know how long at the beginning, by these disturbing aliens called the Nalatok. Like, the descriptions of the Nalatok, but I loved it. She, within the first 50 pages, is staging this prison break, more or less, and breaking out all these other aliens. And there's this gigantic moment in the beginning, and I don't want to spoil it for you because it's, that I loved. I messaged the author on that Discord server multiple times while reading this, You Sadistic Bitch, which is how you know it's a good book. I loved that it was very, very much like sci-fi, like the aliens were aliens. They weren't just like slightly altered humans. I loved Sorrow, who is this super ultra like physically dense alien that looks like a toddler but is also semi-psychotic and can kind of like rip through the walls of ships, and the abilities that Sam kind of earns or gets or happens upon over the course of the story are so intriguing, were such new sci-fi concepts that I loved. I've never seen anything like one of her biggest abilities is, and I would love to see more of this. And I went back and I told Casey White after I think the last You're a Sadistic Bitch message I sent to her, you're giving me the next one, right? Because this is this is one of my new like favorite space operas. Was by far my favorite of this month. This was a pretty good month, so I would highly suggest this so much. I loved it, and I just love sci-fi. I just love space operas. They're just my thing. It's so good. And last up, I needed to slow down my indie reading because I was literally going to cover too much of the board to give myself any content for the Indiecember vlogs I wanted to do. So I decided to take on one of the traditional books I had for review that I had gotten from a Bookish First raffle, and I decided to go for some nonfiction. So I read Youre Not Listening by Kate Murphy, and I'm holding this book weird. This is a nonfiction basically about how people aren't listening to each other and how to do it better. Now, when I saw this on Bookish First, I thought, okay, best case scenario, this is a boon and will help improve communication and understanding. Worst case scenario, this is a kids these days anti-social media rant. So which one are we getting here? And in the end, ended up somewhere in the middle. There were some very, like, well thought out points about how to ask questions to facilitate listening and facilitate conversations and the benefits of listening and all that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of social media, and back before people knew how to listen better, but she didn't actually have any solid hard evidence for people that used to listen better. It was all anecdotal and quotes and stuff, but then had hard evidence for why kids weren't listening today. And also the author's understanding of social media was a little bit whack. Like, she knew what ghosting and Fortnite was, but she also like kept making all these little quips. But you can't have a meaningful conversation in 140 characters. Like, she kept having those little quips about 140 characters, except Twitter hasn't had 140 characters for 2 years. And this book isn't even published yet. It comes out in January, so like it's already dated before it's been published. So in general, I wish she would have just dropped that entirely, because like the whole, that social media, you kids need to get off it, is so out of touch with the current climate, where people have made genuine, long-lasting friendships on digital media like platforms. Like, you hear about those guys that have been teaming together on Xbox for 15 years, being in each other's wedding or coming to each other's hospital bedside. Like, the idea you can create friendships from social media, and the idea that this was like one of those, you just need to get off it and focus on quote-unquote real relationships, felt really out of touch with the modern world. But there are still good tips and tricks in it. I probably won't be getting my review out for this in December, because I want in December to be all about the indie books. So I don't know. It doesn't come out until January, so it might be like a January 1st review. I'm not sure exactly, but this is one that's not necessarily the handy guide that I was hoping for. So that is it, all of the books I read in November. And like I said before, I'm learning to give myself a break. That reading quote-unquote only 11 books really isn't that bad. I'm also really excited for Indiecember. If you're watching this on the day it was uploaded, I have already started the vlogs, and I'm so excited for it. It's going to be so much fun. So if you're interested in that and seeing me geeking out about indie books yet further still, please subscribe. Also, comment down below if you've read any decent nonfiction books lately that actually like speak fondly of social media. I would love to read those as well. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.